Meeting of Bridgewater Town Council to order. You have the agenda in front of you. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, we will deem the agenda approved and go down to announcements. I'm always looking at Councilor Thor, but I know there's something.
Desbrizet Museum, Your Worship, Saturday, November the 2nd, 2 p.m., try rug hooking. Visitors will also have a chance to try their hand at rug hooking with certified rug hooking instructor Heather Gordon. She will share her knowledge, bring displays of tools and rugs, and as well as demonstrate the tradition of rug hooking. You are invited to bring a heritage or family hook rug for identification. The cost is $5 per person. Saturday, November the 9th, 2 p.m., Remembrance Day celebration. Join us for an afternoon as we celebrate our military veterans. Displays of artifacts, watch videos as told by World War II veterans, reading of letters, music by the Bridgewater Fire Department Band Quartet, fallen soldiers table display, and refreshments will be available. Free admission, donations appreciated. And that's for the next couple of weeks, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements? Councilor McGuinness.
Yes, want to bring people up to date on our Christmas on Have, and in particular our parade and fireworks. They take place this year on November 30th, which is a Saturday evening, and we are taking applications for floats at this point in time. We have some. We could always use more. This is a major event for our town. I know last year there were estimates of anywhere from 10 to 12,000 people along the parade road to see this event. So it's a big event that's great for the family in that time of the year. So we are soliciting for floats, and I just want to put that out there. We always have anywhere from 65 to 80 floats, and we will again this year. So the committee's been working hard now for the past 6 months to bring this to the people of Bridgewater, and all we need now is for one to go to church on Sunday and ask the good Lord for sunny weather on Saturday, October or November 30th.
Thank you, Councilor. Other announcements from members of council? No. All right, thank you. Are there any delegations, any members of the public that wish to address council at this time? This is the time to do it. Seeing none, we'll move down to the minutes of October 15th, regular town council meeting. Any errors or omissions? Hearing none, we will declare the minutes approved and go down to our first agenda item, which is the election of deputy mayor. We do this every year. I will just remind you that the blue ticket you have in front of you with all of your names on it is your nomination ballot. Please choose one nominee if you wish. You don't have to choose any nominees, but only one. And then Ms. Porter-Lowe will come around and collect those. Okay? Should we fold it now? And I think every year this comes up, and every year we say, don't we do this every 2 years? But no, the answer is we do this every year. But since we keep asking that question, recognizing that this is, we're less than a year from the next municipal election, if council wishes to address that policy and change it to every 2 years, that is something that we should put on a future agenda item, as a future agenda item and discuss. So they're going to go check the nominees and let us know. I wish I had any jokes. We probably should have done announcements while they were checking those.
The new facade at K&S Fashions and the new
awning
business looks really, really good.
It does. So
yeah,
good.
Sharp.
Yes, the facade program has been in full swing, I feel, this year.
Yeah.
I think there are some funds left.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's an announcement for any businesses on King Street that wish to apply for the facade program. That money is available, and you can just take a stroll down King Street and see the money that's been put to good use on those. I see there's work on a property in King Street for a new business coming, so that's good as well.
You ready?
Yeah. Do you want a
All right.
drum roll?
Yep. The nominees are Councillor Andrew Tanner and Councillor Bill McGinnis.
I'll withdraw my name at this point in time.
Okay. That just leaves, that just leaves, I was gonna say Deputy Mayor Tanner to be Deputy Mayor
Okay.
Tanner still.
All right.
Do you accept the nomination?
I do, thank you.
All right.
Claimed.
Well, there you go. Wow, so obviously you don't need your yellow ticket.
We'll keep it just.
All right, did you have a speech to make? No?
No.
And that's why you're
We're
Deputy
going
Mayor.
to it after,
Good
we're
job.
going to it after, though, aren't we?
Sure. All right. First item on our planning items is public hearing and second reading of the development agreement of 18 Hurdle Drive, and we'll turn that over to our planner, Ms. Childs.
Thank you. Staff have an application for the development agreement at 18 Hurdle Drive. The applicants are interested in constructing a 38-unit residential building on vacant property. The building would be 3 stories with 1 level of partially underground parking. The zoning of this property is high-density residential, and the surrounding zoning is single-unit residential, urban commercial, high-density residential, and LaHave commercial. And surrounding uses are single and multi-unit residential, as well as some nearby commercial. And a development agreement is required for this development because multi-unit dwellings containing between 21 and 30 units per acre may be permitted by development agreement. And based on the size of this property, which is slightly over an acre, 38 units may be permitted. And the development agreement would specify that the development shall be limited to 1 38-unit dwelling with 1 residential unit of amenity space, as well as uses permitted in the high-density residential zone. The development agreement would state that the height and massing of the building shall be in reasonable accordance with the elevation drawings. This is one of the 4 that have been provided, and it shows that the building is 3 stories with 1 additional floor of partially exposed parking. And the development agreement would state that the exterior design of the building shall be in reasonable accordance with the renderings, and 1 of the 5 renderings that have been provided are shown here. It shows the location of the entrances, the inclusion of balconies, and more or less how the building is structured. A detailed landscaping plan will be received prior to the issuance of a development permit and would be to the satisfaction of the development officer. The landscaping would be in reasonable accordance with that plan, including trees, shrubs, grassed areas, and buffers. The forested buffers are shown in light green around the edge of the property, and they must be in substantively the same location and area as shown to minimize disturbance to neighboring properties. And the development agreement states that no existing trees beyond 3 inches of caliper would be removed unless dead or diseased, and only then with the approval of the development officer. Setbacks are included as well and shall be no less than 20 feet to Hurdle Drive, 22 feet towards Aberdeen Road, 35 feet towards McNeil, and 18 feet to the rear of the property. But a 20% variance of those buffers and the setbacks may be considered, and that's to allow slight changes once the developer actually gets on the ground. Amenity space must be equal to or greater than 8,208 square feet, which is the amount that's required in the land use bylaw. And it states that it must include but not be limited to balconies for all units, a minimum 600 square foot interior communal space, and an exterior barbecue patio as shown in this rendering. And 48 vehicle parking spaces are required by the land use bylaw, and they are proposing 43 indoor and 5 outdoor spaces. A minimum of 19 bicycle spaces, both indoor and outdoor, would also be required. A detailed wastewater flow study and offsetting measures are required as part of the development agreement process and are currently being discussed with engineering. And a detailed stormwater management plan is required before a development permit is issued. And all post-development peak stormwater is equal to must be equal to or less than pre-development flows. And staff looked at policies in the municipal planning strategy. So those included for general and residential areas include reducing conflict between uses, enhancing and preserving the character of the area, supporting a full range of housing options and styles, supporting walking and cycling, including amenity space, promoting residential densification, and maximizing existing infrastructure. There are also policies in the municipal planning strategy for open space. There are requirements for green space and amenities, as well as retention of trees and vegetation. And again, mentioning that all development peak flows must be equal or less than pre-development. The municipal planning strategy also has policies related to specifically to development agreements that were analyzed for this. And those include compatibility of the use as well as the compatibility of the building, landscaping, adequacy of existing infrastructure, the accessibility by emergency services, active transportation, parking, and environmental impacts, including slopes and floods. A public participation meeting was held on August 28th at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. 14 members of the public attended, and an email and a letter were received by staff. The main concerns were traffic, as there are ongoing discussions about removing the restricted access at Hurdle Drive and Aberdeen Road. People were commenting on both sides that removing it would affect the flow of vehicles, but also that if it were kept, traffic would increase along McNeil Drive. And a traffic study, as I mentioned, is required to determine if this would be removed. There was also concern about having enough off-street parking and concern that there would be an increase in on-street parking. And the applicants have met the parking requirements in the land use bylaw. There was concern about wastewater and stormwater affecting neighboring properties. And as I mentioned, there are studies required for this. The applicant there was also questions about the impact and the timeline of construction. And at the meeting, staff went over the timeline of our process, and the applicant also mentioned that they intend to begin construction in the spring. There was also questions about short-term rentals, and staff did confirm that the town doesn't have regulations associated with short-term rentals at the time, but the applicant mentioned their practice of restricting them. So it's recommended that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater give second and final consideration to the proposed development agreement and enter into the development agreement regarding the property located at 18 Hurdle Drive. And the next steps, if it were to be approved, there would be a notice of approval published in the newspaper, which would then begin a 14-day appeal period. Any aggrieved parties would then be able to appeal to the UARB.
Thank you. And I should open this up by saying this is a public hearing, so all statutory requirements have been met, and we'll go through kind of the flow of the public hearing format. Councilor McGinnis, you had a question?
I don't recall the term amenity space before. Is that
Okay.
something new?
No, it's
Oh, okay.
included in the land use bylaw, and it can really vary. It's something that can be used by the people in the building. So outdoor space that's more than just a grassy area, or a balcony space, or a gym.
But that's not our condition.
It's in the land use bylaw that there are. You have to have a certain amount based on the type of units that are in the building. So the 8,200 that I mentioned is the requirement from our land use bylaw, which they have met in this.
So we can dictate whether a building has balconies and that type of thing?
Yeah, so we don't.
Really?
We can't dictate specifically what type we require, but we do require a set amount.
That's something new.
Deputy Mayor Chan.
Mackenzie, could you repeat what you said about traffic? There is a traffic study that has been done, or it is being done?
So the
going
traffic
forward?
study has been done. It's
Okay.
with the engineering department right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
And so they're working with the applicant's engineer to determine if the removal of that restricted access at Hurdle Drive would be a good idea or
Okay.
not.
Councilor Thorburn.
Mackenzie, I think you said it was 38 units, and we have 48 parking spots.
Yeah.
Is that enough for visitors to go there, or would they be parking on the street as well?
I think I actually can't remember off the top of my head if there's currently on-street parking. The on-street parking wouldn't change based on this, but it fulfills what is required in the land use bylaw for that amount of units.
But there is 10 additional ones.
Yeah.
More than one. Okay.
Further questions from council? Is there a presentation from the developer or any comments from the developer?
Anything you'd like to add?
No? Okay, Councilor Graves, sorry.
So when do we get a report on the traffic study? Is that
So there's no actual report. There is a traffic study that we could share. Yeah, but it would, I guess, kind of be separate from this. The traffic study has to be completed. We could do the development. So I guess the traffic study is fine for that location. It's just that restricted access that I think is still being determined. Conversations with the other department.
so when is that determined?
So I guess before we can sign the development agreement, we just have to confirm that it is It is good, and they would make changes if it wasn't, so like they wouldn't remove the access if
So
it.
that's a determination by the traffic authority, is what you're saying. So we're down to comments by the members of the public. If there's any members of the public who wish to make comment, the structure for a public hearing is we would start with those in favor, and then we'll go to those opposed, and then finally with any other comments. And if you are making comment, please make sure you state your name for council. If there's anyone, yeah, just come to the podium if you please.
I can stand up and yell.
Well, we do, like, because we're live streaming, it's easier for.
Easy this way?
Easier for this way. Not for you, but for everyone else.
Dan Squires. We live on the corner of Hurdle and Porter, McNeil, and all that stuff. Just on the traffic study, I would lump in up on up at the top. Glen Allen, that's right. Coming off of McNeil onto Glen Allen is going to be a little bit more of a show. Even today, going up to that corner, you got the medical center on the corner, you got hospital stuff coming out, people trying to make left-hand turns and whatever coming off that street. 38 units is going to add a fairly significant kind of flowish thing. So I would just recommend you might want to think about four-way stops or something up there, because I'm sure you're going to have a few more fender benders, for sure.
No, I appreciate that, and we can pass that on to the traffic authority to make sure that they look at that. Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Any further questions from council? Councilor McDonald?
If the traffic authority changed the flow of traffic on Hurdle Drive so that it's not just a right-hand turn, there would be infrastructure that have to be upgraded, correct?
Yeah, so they'd be looking at what the best option was. There's also, like, for example, the traffic study looks at sight lines, so certain things,
Right.
even like brush, would have to be cleared back and
Yeah.
things like that. So they would do it to make sure it's the safest.
Okay, thank you.
So related to that comment, would that McNeil Glen Allen be included in the traffic study now that it's been raised as a concern?
Yeah, I
Okay.
actually can't remember off the top of my head, but they
Okay.
look at the area
Okay.
rather than just like the one street.
Just that one street, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. It says now closing remarks to the chairman. I'll just say that, I'm pleased when the number of members of the public that appear at public meetings, I think that's a good thing. We tend to look at the other way and say, oh, no one shows up, so I guess nobody has any concerns. But I think that's not a true reflection. I think sometimes when no one shows up, it's because nobody wanted to be the person that raised their concerns. And so I just want to thank the members of the public that did raise those. I trust that staff has gone through them all and has addressed them or is going to address them. So I want to thank the public. I know it's not always easy in a small community to be the one that either steps up to the podium. And it's much harder to be on that side of that podium than it is on this side, just as you know. So I know it's not always easy, so I applaud you all for either coming out to this meeting or going to the meeting that was for this project. Is someone on council prepared to make a motion? Councilor Frazier.
Yes, Your Worship. The Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater gives second and final consideration to the proposed development agreement and enter into the development agreement regarding the property located at 18 Hurdle Drive in a manner similar to the draft development agreement dated October 28, 2019, and contained in Appendix A of Document 19-104B, and the Mayor and Chief Administrative Officer are hereby authorized to execute this agreement only within the time frame described in the development agreement. Should the document not be signed within the time frame described in the development agreement, Council shall consider any request to sign the development agreement as a new application and follow the entire process required by the Municipal Government Act.
Thank you. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Tanner. Any further discussion? Councilor Thorburn?
Yes, Your Worship. That development agreement, is that 12 months or 24 months?
12.
Remember that?
It's 12, right? Most are 12.
They have 12 months in order to do something. Right, well, you have to file a new agreement.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. I thought it was 12, just checking.
Anything else?
I'd like to thank the developer for coming to our town and putting his hard-earned money into our town. Much appreciated. Question?
Question's been called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. And I will note that there is an appeal period for the public. That starts now, I guess. No? After we
post it in the paper.
publish it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. And how long is that appeal period?
14 days.
14 days. Thank you. Okay. Next item is 7.2, appeal of variance for 94 Wenzel Drive. Easy for you. We'll turn that over to our development officer.
Thank you. Town received a request for a variance from minimum requirements on September 13th relating to a proposed warehouse expansion at 94 Wenzel Drive. The land use bylaw, in accordance with the municipal planning strategy, allows staff to vary or reduce setback distance requirements to property boundaries. The Municipal Government Act sets forth criteria for the evaluation of such requests. A variance may not be granted where it violates the intent of a land use bylaw, or where the difficulty experienced by the applicant results from an intentional disregard for the requirements of the land use bylaw, or where the difficulty experienced is general to properties in the area. Staff determined that the criteria of the Municipal Government Act would be met. The request does not violate the intent of the land use bylaw. The request does not constitute an intentional disregard of the land use bylaw, and the difficulty experienced is not general. The location of the existing structure and resulting limitations for expansion, as well as the irregular lot configuration, make this situation unique. The variance request was granted on October 1st. That same day, notices were sent to every assessed property owner whose property is within 100 feet of 94 Wenzel Drive. The notice described the variance granted and set out the right to appeal the decision to council. So I'll explain the application and rationale for granting the variance. The request was for a reduction of 2 setback distance requirements. Firstly, for a reduction to the side yard setback requirement. So that's the shared property boundary with the Lightco building at the corner of Logan Road and Wenzel Drive. The variance request was granted for the side yard, reducing the setback distance from 13 foot to 5 foot. Staff believe that the story-and-a-half expansion to the existing warehouse will not result in a negative impact to that adjacent property due to the presently developed area of that property being approximately 100 feet away and slightly elevated from the subject property. A 5-foot setback from a building to a property boundary is a typical setback in the town's residential zones, where proximity to a neighbor can be quite impactful. From a building code perspective, the warehouse expansion may be built to 5 feet to shared property boundary, contingent on type of construction, for example, cladding material, or size and number of openings facing that property line. So it can be built to a standard that would allow it to be any distance to that property line. Secondly, the request included a reduction to the rear yard setback requirement adjacent to the Samick building at 109 Logan Road. The variance request was granted for the rear yard, reducing that setback distance from 16 foot to 8 foot 3 inches. Staff believe there will be minimal impact to the property at 109 Logan Road. The existing warehouse structure at 94 Wenzel Drive is located at 10 foot 6 inches from the subject property boundary. While this legal non-conforming structure cannot be expanded at that same setback distance to the property boundary without this variance process, it should be noted that the granted variance would result in a reduction of 2 foot 3 inches to the current setback distance at the closest point of the expanded building. So, as a result of staff's evaluation and determination that the variance request is in accordance with the Municipal Government Act, staff believe the applicant's variance requests to be reasonable and consistent with the intention of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. I'll mention as well that this is an appeal hearing, and per the Municipal Government Act, the development officer is supposed to provide a recommendation. So therefore, as development officer, I will recommend that council uphold the decision.
Thank you. I'm just going through the next pieces here. We have the submission before us, so we don't need the CAO maybe to read the whole submission. So that is in your agenda package, the letter that we received. I guess the next is there a presentation from the applicant? Do we know?
The written submission is from the applicant.
Yeah, so there's no additional presentations from the applicant? Or is there a presentation from the appellants? No? All right. Does the council have questions for the development officer? Well,
It's pretty clear to me.
all right, then is council prepared to make a decision? Looking for a motion? Oh, do you have closing remarks? Sorry.
Just that I'll review the council's options.
Okay.
Uphold the development officer's decision to approve the variance, grant the appeal, or defer the decision to a future date.
Thank you. Someone prepared to make a motion? I think Councilor Frazier was
Yes.
first.
Yes, Your Worship, that council for the town of Bridgewater uphold the decision of the development officer to grant the variance of 94 Wenzel Drive, PID number 60382835.
Okay, thank you. Have a seconder, please. Councilor Graves. Further discussion?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next item is application for development agreement, Black Seal Properties Limited, 493 King Street. I guess Ms. Childs again. All right.
493, right? That's the
Yep.
first one? Okay.
Yes.
So this is just the preliminary, so it's quite brief, but an application was received by staff from Black Seal Properties Limited for a development agreement to construct a mixed-use development at 493 King Street, so that's just at the corner of Phoenix. And this is the site of the old Bank of Montreal building. The property is zoned Historic Downtown Commercial, or C1, and the surrounding uses include retail, office, restaurant, microbrewery, and lounge, and residential. In the C1 zone, any new multi-unit residential development exceeding 5,000 square feet in gross floor area, where the ground floor building frontage is occupied by a commercial use and more than 50% of the ground floor area is used for commercial, may be permitted by development agreement. So this application is for a 6-story building, with the back half of the 6-story being a open rooftop deck for residents. The existing brick building that's there now would be used as commercial on the first level and residential on the second, with 4 additional stories of residential constructed above that. The applicant would like to provide a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units, with the 5th and 6th floors being 2-level units. There were some recent amendments made to the C1 zone permitting negotiations with height through a development agreement, and that opens the discussion of having a 6-story building on the corner lot. Prior to the amendments, 5 stories were permitted on corner lots. There will be wastewater and stormwater studies completed during this process, and staff will analyze town's policy to determine if the development is supported in terms of compatibility with adjacent land uses, servicing, transportation, the environment, and overall intent of the municipal planning strategy. A shadow study has also been requested. And the next step is to host a public participation meeting. So it's recommended, I think I also forgot that it's a 19 units residential development. So it's recommended that council refer the matter to staff to undertake a public participation meeting in consideration of the development agreement on November 20th at 6 p.m. in Town Hall.
Great, thank you. Questions from members of council? This is just really to refer this to a future meeting. Councilor
Are there
Graves?
requirements for affordable housing?
There are no requirements for affordable housing. There is some information in our municipal planning strategy if people were to want some. There are some policies around that, but it's not a requirement.
Because in the past, to get additional height,
Yes,
we've asked for concessions
right,
that might benefit something like affordable housing. Is
right. So not through the development agreement process for this. The development agreement process, since it's a negotiation, the land use bylaw is used as guidelines, and staff analyzes it to see if it's more or less in similarly enough to the land use bylaw requirements. And then we also do look at what other impacts it might have, but it's not required in this process for that.
Further questions, Councillor Thorburn?
Did we just pass a bylaw allowing 5 stories?
Mm-hmm.
This is 6.
5 stories as of right, wasn't it?
So before the amendments were passed, it was 5 stories on corner lots.
Yeah.
That was permitted,
Yeah.
but the amendments actually now permit negotiations of higher than that through a development agreement.
And that's all along that area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I know we had talked about it. So.
Okay, Councillor Graves?
So then in terms of parking, they're negotiating with the town for land behind the building? Is that my understanding?
I think there's discussions happening with the town about parking, because there isn't a lot. There's no parking in that building right now. So staff would look at the required amount and also some bicycle parking for people who are not going to have a car. So there's different aspects of the parking that's being looked at. Mm-hmm.
Any further discussion? Someone prepared to make a motion, please? Deputy Mayor Tanner?
I move that council for the town of Bridgewater refer the matter to staff to undertake a public participation meeting in consideration of the development agreement for 493 King Street on November 20th, 2019, from 6 to 7 p.m. at Town Hall.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Frazier. Further discussion?
Question?
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. And then we're going to move on to 641 King Street. I love that we have two applications for development agreements on King Street at the same meeting. This is, I feel like I want to say it's a long time coming, but we've talked about things turning around on King Street. We talked about K&S Fashions and some of the other places that have used that facade money to really start to beautify that street, and we can see where this is going to be potentially developed, and so it's nice to see that tonight we have 2 applications. So, Ms. Childs.
Thanks. Unfortunately, it makes the presentation a little bit boring because it's pretty similar. So, staff have received an application made by Family Service Association of Western Nova Scotia to construct mixed-use development at 641 King Street. Shown on the map there, that's the location of the old Gauss Home Hardware and Home Furnishings building. The property is also zoned historic downtown commercial, and the surrounding land uses are retail, office, restaurant, microbrewery, and lounge, and there's some residential nearby. And in the C1 zone, as I said before, any new multi-unit residential development exceeding 5,000 square feet in gross floor area, where the ground floor building frontage is occupied by commercial use and more than 50% of the ground floor area is used for commercial, may be permitted by development agreement. And this proposed development, also mixed use, it would be between 2 and 5 stories in height, depending on where in the building. And it would have visually distinct facades along King Street, providing the impression of multiple buildings. The recent amendments to the C1 zone permit the negotiations with the height through the development agreement. So previously, 5 stories were permitted on corner lots and 3 stories were permitted mid-block, but the 5 stories requested for part of this are permitted now with those amendments. The intention of the applicant for this property is to have commercial and office on the ground floor, and also some commercial on the second floor. There would be 32 residential units, and they would consist of a mix of studio apartments, 1, 2, and 4-bedroom units on the upper levels, as well as some on the lower level. There would also be a public courtyard in the middle of the building, and that would have access from King Street and also from the units and the commercial spaces. And wastewater and stormwater studies will also be completed throughout the process, and staff will analyze the town's policy to determine the compatibility of the development. And the next step is to host a public participation meeting. So it is recommended that council refer the matter to staff to undertake a public participation meeting in consideration of the development agreement on November 20th at 7 p.m. at Town Hall. So they'd be on the same day.
Right, thank you. And once again, any questions to our planner? Pretty straightforward. Councillor McDonald, yes, please.
I would move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater refer the matter to staff to undertake a public participation meeting in consideration of the development agreement for 641 King Street on November 20th, 2019, from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. at Town Hall.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Frazier. Further discussion?
Question?
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Our next item is maintenance at Veterans Memorial Park. And I'll turn that over to the CAO.
Okay, so this is in Don's absence. We, council received funds back in 2017 from the estate of Dorothy Isabel Walker for Veterans Memorial Park, and these funds are put into reserve and used for park expenses. There's been a request received from the Legion to access some funds to rebuild the walls around the flagstaff, and they've made that request to council. Council grants the request. There are funds. There's $26,589.15. So you would reduce that by $9,000 if you use the funds to do that. And Michael Noss is here as well in the event that council has any questions about the project.
Does council have any questions? Councillor Thurman.
I think I should call a conflict of interest. I am president of the Legion, so maybe I should be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, no, I appreciate you. Better late than never. Any questions? Councillor Frazier.
Just so, who does the project? Is town staff doing the project, or does it go out for?
My understanding is it's being done by volunteers. Is that, no?
Oh, Chief, you got to come down. You knew you weren't going to get away with that.
I know better. We did a study on the flag area in the little rock wall that's holding it up the backfill and stuff. It's deteriorating quite a bit. We went out and we got a quote from Heritage Landscaping, and we also asked a second person for a quote, and he was unable to give us one at this time because he's too busy. So we only have one quote. We tried to get a third one that was around this area and just not able to do so. So that's what we had done.
So the work is being done to answer Councillor Frazier's.
It would be done. Once you tell us, yes, we have the money, then we are going to award the project to Heritage Landscaping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Not town staff.
Thank you. That's good.
Just a question, or for clarification. It's not town money that we're awarding here. It's money that was bequested to the,
Correct.
you know, for the Veterans
Held
Park.
in trust for these,
Yes.
for the items at this park.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but it is, council has the discretion to
Sure.
award or not
Sure.
award. Yes, Councillor McDonald, sorry,
Wasn't
Councillor
that
Graves.
job done about 8 years ago?
8 to 10 years ago would have been, yes, and frost heaves, stuff like that every year to get something down. What they plan on doing this time is going down a little bit deeper for the base, because this was more or less just put down, I would say, about a foot underground level. So, and then they'll put some insulation as well around that area to hold it.
Motion?
Yes, please.
I move the town council for the town of Bridgewater approve a reimbursement of up to $9,000 to the Bridgewater Legion Branch 24 for the rebuilding of the walls around the flagstaffs.
Seconded by Councillor Graves. Further discussion? Hearing none. Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Councillor Thorburn, you can return,
Thank you.
unless you have a conflict with the aerated carts. All right. If you recall at the last council meeting, we gave notice to repeal policy 50 regarding billings for aerated carts, and I know you've all waited for this very moment because this is super exciting. Do you want to run us through that?
Essentially, the policy is no longer required. Your solid waste bylaw states that owners of properties are required to acquire a cart, and your fee policy states the fees. So this policy did both, but it was redundant and kind of replaced by those other two pieces of the bylaw in the policy.
Perfect. I love that we're cleaning this stuff up. Just makes it easier. Someone prepared to make a motion, please. Councillor Thorburn.
I would move that town council for the town of Bridgewater repeal policy 50, billings for aerated carts, effective immediately.
Seconded by Councillor McDonald. Councillor Graves, you look like you have a question.
For the carts, are we not supposed to have 80, 120, and 240 liter? You talked about it last year, I think.
I'm not too sure I'd have to look in your bylaw and see what it
I think there's only
says.
2 sizes, correct?
There's only 2, yeah.
2, but there
Yeah,
are other
but
sizes available.
I believe there are a little bit of a smaller one that the Joint Services Board has been giving out to people who may not need the big one they might have mobility issues, can't lug out the big cart, so they use a little bit of a smaller one.
Is that how it is?
Yeah, well, okay, as long as it's mentioned.
Okay.
That it's an option, right?
Yeah, our bylaw has the size at 120 and 240 liter
Yeah, but
capacities,
there was a
but there
smaller-
is a smaller one that's available, so.
Right. And that'll be shown on the fees.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. We have a mover and seconder. Any further discussion?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. That was quick. That takes us to the end of our agenda, but we do have an in-camera meeting, so our night's not over. But motion to adjourn.
So
Councilor
moved.
Thorburn, seconded by Councilor McDonald. We are adjourned. Thank you.